morning. I'm very, very happy to be here. And many thanks for the invitation to Michelle Cotton, Laura Kovac, and Jasmin Gründling-Riener. When I received Michelle's invitation to contribute to the catalogue Radical Software, Women, Art and Computing, 1960-1991, my first reaction was to decline. I declined, despite having researched that pioneering era really for many years. I declined because when I did a quick research on women in computing in the 1960s on my computer, the first images that appeared on my screen were these. My extensive collection of women in computer advertisements. What works for cars apparently also works for computers. Fast computers and pretty girls, blights and babes. What I initially found little material on, however, were women, artists and curators, who had demonstrably presented computer-generated artworks to the public in the 1960s. And I'm very grateful to Michelle that she insisted that I continue my research. And I do adore discussing very conceptual questions of computing and arts, but as some fundamental aspects are not widely known, I will take this opportunity today also to present some of my historical findings in a rather straightforward method. One of the most influential women in the field of computer art was Jascha Reichhardt. Born in Warsaw in 1933, Jascha escaped the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942 and reached England in 1946, and she became an editor and, as she called it, an exhibition organizer. In 1963, Jascha joined the ICA London as an associate director, and there, with the exhibition Cybernetic Serendipity, which opened in October 1968, she curated one of the most, I think I did a wrong date here, I think it was, or was it October? I'm not sure. She created one of the most significant exhibitions on so-called computer art in the 1960s, and it was a true research project. That is to say, it had no predetermined conclusion, and as passionately as Jascha investigated the subject, she maintained a sober distance. She noted cybernetic serendipity deals with possibilities rather than with achievements, and in this sense, it's prematurely optimistic. Many of the early works created with computers using pseudo-random processes could, in principle, have been produced just as well with a roll of the dice. So Reichhardt coolly diagnosed, to use the computer is primarily a demonstration of an attitude. And she elaborated, to use the computer implies a concern with technology, an up-to-date outlook, and the admittance of the possibility that the computer will one day be something in the nature of a household appliance. This sobriety stood in stark contrast to the sometimes sensationalist press coverage of the early 60s, which speculated whether computers could be truly creative and whether they would soon replace artists as swiftly as they would replace accountants. With cybernetic serendipity, Jascha had profound influence both on her contemporaries but also today how we see those days. But who were these other women who played a significant role in the intersection of art and computer technology in the 1960s? A look into the exhibition catalogue of Cybernetic Serendipity, a special issue of Studio International, reveals that this question actually touches a more fundamental issue. Depending on the method of how you count, the catalogue lists approximately 110 individuals, artist group and researchers, yet among them only 5 women. Jean Beeman, Alison Knowles, Margaret Masterman, Judith M. Pruitt, and Ulla Wing. And I would like to give you a brief impression of these contributions of these 5 women. The dancer Jean Hayes Beeman was a pioneer in the field of computer-assisted choreography. In 1964, she began developing what became known as computer dance in collaboration with Paul Lavasseur, and from 1966 onwards, she worked with Dale Eisner. The first dances generated by computers were based on 3 types of commands: tempo, movement, and direction. And these commands were compiled into lists from which the computer randomly selected sequences. And the challenge of the dancers were to interpret these sequences. The random nature of the computer-generated commands was intended to break with habits and to create new forms of expressions. Alison Knowles, founding member of the Fluxus movement, created these computer-generated poems following a workshop on computer programming led by the composer James Tenney in '67. Tenney, who worked then at the Bell Labs in Murray Hill, organized these sessions for his friends at the home of Alison Knowles and Dick Higgins. And this very exclusive circle included, among others, Namjoon Paik and Steve Reich. For this piece, Knowles compiled 4 word lists which were then arranged by a computer program, again with pseudo-random processes. And each house was defined by material, location, and light source and type of inhabitants. A short remark on computer-generated poetry, early examples of which were actually already published in the 1950s. Poets from the Baroque to Dadaism had already experimented with change-based composition, and methodologically, at first glance, there was no fundamental difference. However, for some poets, the particular fascination of computer-generated poetry lay in the fiction that the electronic brain might possess something akin to consciousness, yearning for self-expression. And for others, there was also the simple pleasure of misusing the device that was meant for war, efficiency, optimization, and control, and to use this device for the arts. Margit Masterman, the third in cybernetic serendipity, was presented with the computerized Japanese haiku. She did this together with Robin McKinnon Wood. And for this haikus, she developed a semantic combinatorial scheme. And you might have never heard of Margit Masterman before, so a brief word about her background. Masterman was a pioneer in natural language processing. While linguistics in the 1950s and 60s, under the influence of Noam Chomsky, was primarily concerned with syntax, Masterman, trained both as a linguist and a philosopher, focused on semantic models for machine translation. And her focus was the ambiguity of natural language, which large language models today attempt to handle more efficiently, though challenges remain. And as for experiments with these kind of poems, she saw it as a new folk art, one that could provide non-experts with a playful way to engage with language. The images in whose creation Judith Ames Pruitt was involved were produced using a SIDEC, a device that could convert microscopic objects and photographs into a series of numbers, which would then be processed by a computer. And the goal was to develop an automated system capable of distinguishing, for example, types of cells. If you're surprised that there are so many also scientific projects in that exhibition, that was intentional. Joshua Reichert looked at the impact of computers both on art and science, and also Mrs. Pruitt did not enter art history for her images. She did leave a mark on computer science. She's the creator of the Pruitt operator, a method for edge detection in images, which remains an important algorithm in image processing today. The fifth woman represented in cybernetic serendipity, and you have all hopefully seen her paintings in the exhibition, was Ulla Wiggin with her painted portraits of computer components. In fact, that women were, I should show that, yeah. In fact, that women were barely present in exhibitions dedicated to the use of computers was not an exception in that time, it was prevailing reality. Between 1963 and 69, more than about 50 exhibitions featuring computer-generated art took place across Europe, North, Central, and South America, as well as Japan. Yet, if you look at the available documentation, only 2, maybe 3 exhibitions included female participants up until 67. And in 2 cases, both artists had organized the exhibition themselves. So it was only from 68 onward the women began to be included. And now I would briefly like to introduce this little group of women which were exhibited before 68. And I have to emphasize, of course, that this is not exhaustive, but so in addition to the already mentioned artists, there are, this small circle included Sue Hanau, James Lurie, Linda Sue Laurie, Jane Moon, Josefina Rovirosa, and Norma Tamburini. And Janice Lurie was a trailblazing computer scientist at IBM in the 1960s. She developed a groundbreaking software system that placed a light pen in the hands of designers, allowing to create woven patterns within minutes. It was, and Laura's invention was a milestone in what we call now computer-aided design. Her contributions to computational methods led her to becoming the first female IBM programmer to receive the IBM Invention Achievement Award. And her pioneering work also earned her a cover of Computers Automation, and the New York Times dedicated an article to her work featuring the headline, "Quick Compute, Make a Nice Tapestry." Quoting Lurie, "It also seemed about time to bring a woman's touch to the computer age." About Jane Moon, there is very little to say. We know hardly anything about her. Apart from that, she was working for or with Calcom, California Computer Products, a company that produced plotters and digitizers. What I can say, her name was not mentioned, though they were using the image on the cover of the magazine. There's also very little information about Linda Sulowry. I only know that she was a graduate student of painting at George Washington University in Washington when she won the second prize in the Calcom Computer Plotter Art competition. And here you see the eye programmed by Sue Hanauer. Hanauer worked at the Bell Labs, one of the leading research institutions in the US, and she closely collaborated with Manfred Robert Schröder, director of acoustics and speech research in the field of digital signal processing. And she programmed nearly all of the visual works by Schröder, but she was only mentioned as a co-contributor, not a contributor, as a co-author, one time. That was in the catalog Summer Beginning. Otherwise, she was hidden in the credits. A very special case. Oh no, I forgot one group where I also have very little information. That's Josefina Rabirosa and Norma Tamburini. They were part of the group Grupo de Arte Cibernética Buenos Aires, a group that was built in 1969 and first exhibited in August 69. So I now have presented these very early positions, and I would have loved to talk about also all the artists which are in the exhibitions, but I can only recommend to see the wonderful catalog. But there's one special case I want to highlight, and that's Inge Borchardt, who is also here today. She presented her work in 1966 on the occasion of a chamber concert in the small hall of the Leihhalle in Hamburg. And her experiments provide an opportunity to briefly emphasize an important aspect, that is that the history of so-called computer art is not identical with the history of digital art, because the success of the digital computer has obscured the fact that other classes of computers existed, namely analog and hybrid computers. Until the 1970s, electronic analog computers were the fastest computing systems available for real-time simulation. And they were used in aerospace industry, in the chemical industry, and many other areas. And this was precisely such an analog computer that Inge programmed at the DESY, the Deutsches Elektronensynchrotron in Hamburg. She started there in 1961. And in her scientific work, I want to mention this, Inge focused on the problems in the field of accelerator physics, electrical engineering, and control engineering. And she made important contributions to the design and operation of DESY's particle accelerators. And here, just so that you know what it meant to program an analog computer, here you see these wonderful patch panels. But back to the broader overview. A few years ago, the art historian Grant Taylor raised the question whether these two images, and that was the first two winners of the computer art contest, if these images were actually done by women, because these images came from the Ballistic Research Laboratory in Aberdeen. And his argument was based on the fact that this research unit had employed numerous female computers in the 1950s. That is, this woman who performed mathematical calculations. And these women played a key role in the development of the ENIAC, the first programmable electronic general-purpose digital computer. And Grant is a wonderful historian, and I greatly admire him, but I hesitate to make a definite claim about the female authorship, because this was 15 years later, and almost all these early ENIAC programmers had either left the field or worked elsewhere. So there was one person left, but there is no real proof that these images were done by women. So it remains unclear also the question if there were still a large number of women at this research institute, and I will come to that back later. What is, however, clear is that the first woman winning the computer art competition was Lillian Schwartz. So in summary, we can say worldwide were women working in this field, hardly often knowing about each other. And in her important essay, Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists, Linda Nochlin cautioned against mainly searching for great female artists instead. She said, critical examine the social conditions of artistic production in order to understand the absence of women in certain fields and in order to change these structures in the long run. And so to understand that, one really has to see that worldwide it was a very, very small group of people being involved in the 1960s in computer art. If I take women and men together, worldwide it was maybe like 200 persons, 200 individuals who experimented with technologies and artistic mediums. And the barriers were really high. Computing was very expensive. It was just at the big centers, universities, civilian and military research institution, administration at large corporations. So you would find the first experiments at the Bell Lab research laboratories, at the University of Tokyo, at Siemens, at the Technical University Stuttgart, actually also at the TU Wien, and many other places. And of course, this also reflected the global economic conditions. These works emerged in Europe, North America, Japan, and probably the Soviet Union. So there is an issue of underrepresentation beyond women. Entire continents are absent from this chapter of art history. And really, given the limited access, the first people who were doing experiments, aesthetic experiments with computers, were mostly mathematicians, physicists, engineers, meteorologists, and scientists. And on the occasion of the fourth Tendencies 4 exhibition, Computers and Visual Research in Zagreb in August '68, one of the curators, Radoslav Puta, observed, the artist dreamt of the machines, and now the machines have arrived. And they have arrived from a direction which was somewhat unexpected and accompanied by people who are neither painters or sculptors. And I have to underline that they were not entirely welcomed by all artists. There was a hesitation, because these scientists were considered detached from dominant artistic discourse and in some ways naive, and there was also a little curiosity in the art world for new processes and the new epistemological frameworks introduced by computer technology, though these frameworks had already begun to reshape the concept of creativity. And if you ever come to Karlsruhe, we will soon exhibit this sign, which was put up in 1971 by Manfred Mohr in Paris, where people could leave their comments on aesthetic research done with the help of a computer. And you will see the whole spectrum from curiosity to enthusiasm to hate to ridicule. This is how it was received. So, moreover, whether male or female artists, this new art form offered virtually no financial gain. The art market showed little or no interest. And so there were few collections, private and public. These works were integrated. And this had a long-lasting impact also on academic research. Also that there was no market. And it's not just taste that follows money. Our research often does too. I would like to address the question why so few women enter this pioneering phase from yet another perspective. There are many accounts of early history of computer technology which highlight the high number of female programmers. And then you would ask yourself, well, if there were so many programs, why didn't they show up in the art context? But we have to look closer at the statistical data. Now I look mainly at the United States, I have to underline that. But contrary to popular narratives, which are in a lot of popular movies and documentaries, which suggest these popular narratives that women made up 30 to 50% of the workforce in the US computer industry in the 50s and 60s. A study conducted by Thomas Mesa offered a more nuanced perspective, and his findings indicate that the actual percentage of women in this field was around 5% in the 1950s, rising to 15% in the 60s, reaching 22% by the 70s. And it's interesting that the proportion of women continued to increase steadily until 1985, when a sudden decline began, and that's another very interesting story why that happened. So these numbers also demonstrate that the low number of women is also an effect that there were very few women in the computer industry. For the past 20 years, we have witnessed a gradual formation of a canon in the history of computer art, which is extending. And the wonderful exhibition Radical Software is contributing to this process. And there has been an increasing research in the field for the last 2 decades. And at the same time, the art market, as well as private public collections, have shown growing interest, suggesting that earlier reservations about the artistic value of computer-generated artworks have largely dissipated. And the recent surge in public interest in the history of digital art is largely attributable to the NFT boom in 21-22, a period in which digital artworks were sold for unprecedented prices. This development encouraged a new generation of artists to explore their own history, the history of generative art, seeking to position their own work within the broader narrative. And the effort to formally recognize and celebrate the work of the female pioneers of digital art thus extends far beyond academic circles. Influential gallerists, collectors, and critics are playing an active role in this canonization process. And in the course of this, some pioneers are being elevated to an iconic status, while others are being pushed to the margins, a dynamic that serves as yet another indicator of the integration of the digital art into the broader art world. A crucial part of this canonization process is the construction of chronologies. The fascination with identifying the first artwork, the first exhibition, unites us all involved in the field. However, the attempt to pinpoint the first is an almost impossible endeavor. These are moving targets. The emergence of new documents and, more importantly, the definitions applied play a decisive role in shaping chronological classifications. So should this artwork be classified as computer art, so it was in the end painted or drawn by hand? Is it enough that the person just had the idea but did not program himself or herself to be recognized as the author? So, depending on the definition, we might have to rewrite the chronology of the first computer art exhibitions. For a long time, many chronologies considered this exhibition to be the first, and this was at the Howard Weiss Gallery in 1965. It showed works by Michael Knoll and Bella Yulish. But there is this article, Art by the Numbers. As early as May '63, the San Jose Mercury ran the headline, Art by the Numbers, World's First Computer Show. This exhibition, which opened May 6 at the Spartan Bookstore at San Jose State University, actually predated the exhibitions that are commonly regarded as first. The driving force behind the project was Joan Sjogren, who was introduced in press reports as the secretary of the university's chemistry department. In fact, she was holding herself a degree in chemistry. The experiment was conducted by her in collaboration with Raoul James Fessenden, Rim Larson, and Marvin Kuhn. And what they did, they fed into the computer basic design principles, which were then randomly combined. Then they had listings, which looked like income tax tables, is what the press wrote. And then these things were painted by hand. In '66, Show Green said about the reactions to the exhibition, they really got mad, she confides, to the professors of the arts department at San Jose State University. We were, they weren't really, really nasty, but they were very, very sarcastic, she recalls. They insisted you can't put down rules in art, but in anything you accept fundamentals. So this is just another example of the very ambivalent reception of computer art experiments in the early years, and either the triviality was underlined or that it is not art at all, and some of it was simply to desire to defend the sanctity of traditional art forms. It's interesting to see that art was always the measure to judge the capabilities of thinking machines, though one of the very famous quotes when discussing if the computers are intelligent is by Alan Turing, where he said, well, I do not think you can even draw the line about sonnets. Computers will write sonnets. And this, though maybe other computers might be the ones who will appreciate it the most. And I've seen that I have 5 minutes left, so I get a little bit more brief. For what I can say, for the artists and scientists, this working with this making aesthetic experiments, this was never a limitation, but possibility to generate more complex works by delegating minor creative decisions to the machines to create greater complexity, and also to produce animations, which would have taken weeks to complete manually. And, which was also very often mentioned, the strict rules, the strict adherence to algorithmic rules was not seen as a limitation but as an advantage. It enabled artists to break free from their own biases, habits, and social expectations, often leading to unexpected results. I have to say, there's also in that time a very close link to what happened in the art world in general at that time, to include randomness, to see color, words as material, and to recombine them. So I come to the conclusion for the last minute. Joshua Reichert once pointed out that some of the computer artworks could have been produced using conventional techniques. I mentioned that at the beginning. And nevertheless, the fact that these works were created in computing centers and with the use of computers marked a profound shift, both socially and epistemologically. Those who worked with computers operated in an environment deeply embedded in civilian and military research, as well as in industry and public administration, and engaging with computers inevitably led to engagement with the models and methodologies of information theory and cybernetics. And the meaning and the significance of these works cannot be fully understood without considering the circumstances of their creation, but yet when it comes to computer art, we do not only observe a general lack of knowledge about these historical conditions, but also a failure to acknowledge the historicity of technology itself. The continuity of the term computer, which has been used since the 1940s to describe what appears to be an unchanging technology, stands in stark contrast to the fundamental transformation in both the symbolic meaning and the functionality of computers over the years. So, despite the challenges that came with using this technology, artists left their studios to work in computing science centers with scientists engaging in aesthetics experiments in their spare time. And I began with advertising, and so I will end with it. Never, never under-automate the power of a woman. Thank you.